This is week 184 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and I'll be taking you through the top stories from Ukraine this week. This week, two very different gatherings of world leaders provided two very different outlooks on the future of Russia's war and of Russia's standing in the world. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit opened on Monday, segueing into China's Victory Day military parade on Wednesday. On the opposite side of the world, leaders from 39 allied countries convened in Paris on Thursday for the so-called Coalition of the Willing to finalize a package of long-term security guarantees for Ukraine and to coordinate with Washington. In China, Russian President Vladimir Putin rehashed his long-running narrative that NATO enlargement and Western policy provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that any peace negotiation must address the so-called root causes of the conflict, i.e., Russia's version of history. Russia's stance remains that it's acting defensively, and that Western security architecture must be rewritten on Moscow's terms, while Chinese President Xi Jinping ominously warned that the world faces a choice between peace or war. Putin claimed in Beijing that he'd never ruled out meeting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, which is contradictory to the Kremlin's repeated blocking of such a meeting. And Putin claimed that if Zelensky's ready, let him come to Moscow. I'll let that one sit for a moment. The summit and subsequent military parade were the first time that Xi, Putin, and North Korea's Kim Jong-un have appeared publicly together, and there was this made-for-TV moment when the three walked shoulder to shoulder past columns of missiles and massed troops. The scene provided Moscow with a powerful counter-image to Western efforts at isolation, and it also gave Kim a platform to reinforce his wartime partnership with Russia and his validity as the leader of a proper nuclear power, rather than the anomaly that North Korea has long been considered. Western leaders mostly stayed away, although Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico could be seen skulking in the back of the procession, a calculated move to show that Moscow still has at least some allies in the EU. One somewhat funny note. A hot mic during Wednesday's parade caught Putin and Xi musing about biotechnology, organ transplants, and whether humans might live to 150. So I think this offers kind of a fascinating insight into the mind of a dictator who's surrounded by yes-men. I'm sure that in Putin's mind, he does have many more decades of being the world's greatest hockey player ahead of him. Thursday's summit in Paris, by contrast, was about hammering out security guarantees for Ukraine should a peace deal be reached, an event which, for now, remains elusive. Delegations from 39 countries attended, including representatives from Europe, Canada, Japan, and Australia, as well as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. According to Reuters, leaders of European and NATO countries arrived ready to endorse plans drafted by their militaries, a step towards moving support beyond annual budgets and towards durable frameworks for training, air defense, industrial ramp-ups, and long-term financing. While many specifics remained behind closed doors, the objective was clear. Europe wants guarantees that survive election cycles and deter further Russian aggression if a ceasefire is reached. And again, that's still a huge if. That same day, European leaders and Zelensky held a phone call with U.S. President Donald Trump. In the video conference following the summit, Trump reportedly urged the continent to cease purchasing Russian oil, advocated applying economic pressure to China for its role in funding the war, and reaffirmed openness to air support and intelligence aid, but not ground troops as part of security guarantees. French President Macron said that the U.S.'s role in post-war security will be decided in the coming weeks, an anticlimactic end to the meeting. In all, the summit produced little concrete progress. Until a ceasefire or comprehensive peace deal materializes, all such declarations of future security remain theoretical. Grand rhetoric about security assurances and international coalitions and boots on the ground may bolster allies' image and upset Russia, but without a ceasefire or real peace in sight, these gestures amount to empty posturing. Russia has made clear that it won't accept these guarantees, and that it has no intention of ending its war. which rages on undeterred. Ukraine's children started school on Monday, but the occasion was marred by a persistent sound, the air raid alert, which signals a disruption to school time and forces students to quickly relocate underground for the duration. I'll hand it over to Tanya to tell you more.
Across Ukraine, children have returned to school this week after the summer break, but like so much in their lives these days, that break was far from normal, and so was the start of the school year.
The first week has already been interrupted by multiple air raid alerts. On Tuesday here in Kyiv, one lasted through the entire first half of the day. When there is a threat of a Russian aerial attack, students and teachers head to the nearest shelter. Some schools have set up desks and lights in their basements to keep classes going, but for many the only option is the metro, where keeping children focused is an impossible task. Along with Russia's targeted strikes on schools, the war continues to take a toll on children's access to education, and as Moscow ramps up its aerial campaign against Ukraine, that's unlikely to change anytime soon.
The Kyiv Independent is a reader-funded news outlet, meaning that shows like this are only made possible by viewers like you. If you'd like to join our community of more than 20,000 members, there'll be a link to our membership page in the description below. I'd also like to thank everyone who donates directly via YouTube. Your support is greatly appreciated. Last Sunday afternoon, Andriy Paraby, former Speaker of Parliament and a prominent figure in 2 Ukrainian revolutions, was shot dead in the western city of Lviv. This murder, not the first of its kind in recent years, has raised concern that Russia is carrying out a targeted campaign to silence Ukraine's activists. According to witnesses to the murder, the assailant was disguised as a delivery courier and approached Paraby from behind to fire 8 shots from a short-barreled firearm, killing him instantly. Later that same day, President Zelensky announced that a suspect had been apprehended in Khmelnytsky Oblast, a couple hours east of Lviv, about halfway to Kyiv. By Monday, the suspect, a 52-year-old male Lviv resident, had been formally charged with the murder. The shooter had reportedly tracked Paraby's movements, planned an escape route, changed clothes, discarded the weapon, and had plans to flee the country, indicating a contract killing rather than a random assault or crime of passion. The chief of the national police commented that there was a Russian trace to the murder. The investigation took a dramatic turn on Tuesday, when the detained suspect confessed to the crime, saying that he did it in hopes of being exchanged in a prisoner swap with Russia so that he could go find the body of his son, a Ukrainian soldier who went missing near Bakhmut in 2023. The suspect said that he had made contact with Russian representatives while seeking information about his son, and the next day stated to the court that he had carried out the murder as revenge against Ukrainian authorities for his son's death. It was further revealed that the suspect's son apparently served in the same battalion that Paraby briefly served in. While this paints a picture of a grieving parent being manipulated by Russia to do its bidding out of a sense of injustice and need for answers, the suspect's ex-wife and mother of their deceased son took issue with the narrative. In a post on Facebook, she wrote that the suspect had been an absent father who saw his son rarely and disagreed with his decision to enlist in the armed forces. And at the time of her son's death in 2023, father and son were not in communication, because as she put it, one was a patriot and one was not. Further details revealed that the suspect was in debt after a second failed marriage and unpaid alimony. Paraby's long and prominent history as a champion of Ukraine's European identity lent credence to the idea that his murder was calculated and contracted rather than random. He'd been a member of various pro-European parties since Ukraine's independence, and was a prominent figure in both the 2004 Orange Revolution and the 2013 to 2014 Euromaidan Revolution, where he led self-defense units protecting protesters. Afterward, he became secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, ultimately rising to Speaker of Parliament from 2016 to 2019. Veteran political figures and ex-security officers interviewed by the Kyiv Independent agreed that the murder was likely orchestrated by Russia. Former Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk referred to the perpetrator as a Kremlin-sent hitman. A former SBU head echoed this sentiment, claiming that Paruby had been on Russian hit lists since before the start of the full-scale invasion. Borislav Bereza, ex-spokesperson for the nationalist coalition Right Sector, claimed that in early invasion days he was shown a list by the SBU suggesting that Paruby was among the 10 figures most wanted dead by Moscow. If these statements are true, it points to a desire by Russia to eliminate figures that can rally Ukrainians around their national identity, language, and independence, to create chaos and weaken Ukraine from within. As I said, Paruby's murder is one in a string of similar assassinations and assassination attempts in recent years. Activist Sergei Sternenko was stabbed in Kyiv several months ago by a woman who had allegedly received money from Russian intelligence agencies. Sternenko survived that attempt. A prominent figure in the nationalist community, Demyan Hanul, was fatally shot in Odessa 2 months prior to the stabbing of Sternenko. And in perhaps the most eerie precursor to this week's events, the at times controversial nationalist politician and professor, Irina Farian, was shot dead in Lviv last July. Farian was notorious for campaigning heavily against all use of the Russian language in Ukraine. The Russian neo-Nazi group Nationalist Socialism/White Power claimed credit for her death, for which a teenage perpetrator was apprehended. The idea that Russia would seek to systematically eliminate those who publicly campaign for Ukraine's independence and identity is less in the realm of conspiracy theory and more a question of logistics. Russian intelligence clearly has the motive and ability to seek out weak spots, whether teenage neo-Nazis or parents of the dead, in order to reach its targets and divert blame. Such killings send the message that pro-Ukrainian activism can incur a heavy price, and that nowhere is safe. And if that doesn't sound like Kremlin tactics, I don't know what does. We'll end on a lighter note. Metaphorically, if not literally, what started as a symbol of impending Russian doom was transformed into a metaphor for resilience, when a Ukrainian art installation at Nevada's Burning Man festival was destroyed by nature and almost instantly rebuilt by its creators, with new meaning. The Black Cloud installation, which stood 15 meters tall and 30 meters in length, or roughly 1.5 times the size of the Bean in Chicago, was briefly installed on St. Sophia Square here in Kyiv in June before being transported to Nevada for the festival. Conceived by artist Alexei Sai in collaboration with the Ukrainian Witness Media Project, this inflatable structure was intended to be displayed with flickering strobe lights and a soundtrack of missiles, sirens, and explosions, composed by a Ukrainian musician and veteran. When it was displayed here in Kyiv, this audio element was left out so as to not alarm and traumatize the locals. We get enough of the real thing. The message of the piece was unambiguous. Russia's war is a black cloud that will move far beyond Ukraine if others don't take heed. On the morning of its unveiling in the Black Rock Desert, which also happened to be on Ukrainian Independence Day, a severe storm struck with little warning, destroying the installation. Vitaly Denega, one of the Black Cloud's producers, reflected that it felt on par to losing a family member suddenly. But less than a week later, the piece had been remade by its creators an entirely new form, with its materials spelling out the words, "No fate." As in, fate is not what we are given, but what we make of it. The dual installations of the Black Cloud and No Fate come from a lineage of Ukrainian works at Burning Man that serve as metaphors for Ukrainian resilience in the face of Russia's full-scale invasion. The same team was responsible for the 2023 installation Phoenix, symbolizing the ability of Ukraine's spirit to survive the most brutal of attacks, and last year's I'm Fine, symbolizing the emotional burden of carrying grief without accepting defeat. At a festival that preaches radical self-expression and making use of what one arrives with, Ukraine has, for a third year, displayed a message of survival against all odds. For our member question this week, a colleague's going to give me a hand in answering.
Hi, this is Francis, and this week's community member question comes from Alan, who wrote in our Discord, I've often wondered why Ukraine can't or won't adopt a system like Israel's, where there is a year of mandatory public service, not necessarily military. It might be helpful not just from a manpower standpoint, but cultural cohesion through shared experience and sacrifice. Great question, and I think it's no coincidence that we see a lot of countries, especially in Europe, reconsidering these systems of military or service like that. But Ukraine's already in the 4th year of a full-scale war, and at this point, society has pretty much split between those who are keen to be fully involved in the war, they're usually fighting, volunteering, and those who are kind of trying to live their own life and have as little war in their life as possible. So, and of course, Ukraine's in combat right now, so it's a question of what you could actually do with people like that. They have tried to make favorable contracts, enticing contracts for young people between 18 and 24. That hasn't really worked because initially they were all going to go into the infantry, but now they're expanding the program because they also need more drone pilots. And of course, that's a lot kind of less scary for these young people to go into. So it's tricky, but I would definitely recommend any country in Europe who understands that they are already at war and soon could be in a hot war to start a program like that.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you enjoyed this video, as much as anyone can enjoy this kind of news, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. It's thanks to viewers like you that we can do this work, and we're so grateful for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.